Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. It's cold, wet and windy today, and I think today's an ideal time to make a video about camera bodies. Now, anyone that's been following my channel will maybe have watched one of my videos where I'm thinking about switching from a DSLR to a mirrorless camera body for wildlife photography. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, a mirrorless body is much quieter, so you're less prone to scaring off wildlife when you hit the shutter button. And secondly, and probably more importantly for me, is I'm shooting more video footage now, and a camera that's got an electronic viewfinder is a lot easier when it comes to tracking animals when you're shooting video footage. With a DSLR, I've got to switch to live view on the back of the camera, and it's really hard to have the camera at this sort of distance and trying to track moving wildlife subjects. So an electronic viewfinder would be better. And I did a video about whether the Nikon Z6 was a good enough camera body for wildlife photography, and I sort of come to the conclusion that I'd wait until the next generation of Nikon mirrorless bodies come out, and they have. So we've got the Z6 II and the Z7 II. And that's great because I think, the fact that these cameras have got dual processors and those dual processors will give us better autofocus, because it was the autofocus that was, I think, for me the big problem, because I want this body to be able to shoot video footage and stills footage. And stills photographs when it comes to wildlife photography. So, the autofocus needs to be good. And there was a couple of other issues. They didn't have dual card slots and they didn't have a vertical grip, neither of which I was that bothered about, although the dual card slots is quite important, I think. So Nikon, I think, have, sorted out the major problems with the first generation of mirrorless bodies. So I was thinking, yep, I'm going to go straight for the Z6 Mark II, possibly. And then I got to thinking, actually, and this is what this video is all about. At the moment, I use a D500, Nikon D500 digital SLR for my wildlife photography, and that's a crop censored APS-C sensor. So what it basically does is it doesn't magnify the focal length, and I'm going to say that right now because I'm bound to get comments saying you're wrong. It doesn't magnify the... If I say that, a digital crop sensor body magnifies the focal length, that is actually not true. It narrows the angle of view. So my APS-C sensor is a smaller sensor. It gives me a narrower angle of view when I'm using let's say a 500 or 600 millimeter lens. And what that narrower angle of view does is, in practice, it basically gives me an in-camera crop. But in real world terms, it magnifies the focal length. So it turns my 500 millimeter lens into a 750 millimeter lens and my 600 into a 900 millimeter lens. Now, it doesn't make those lenses physically bigger. Obviously it can't, can it? But that smaller sensor gives me a narrower angle of view, which in effect magnifies the focal length by making an in-camera crop, so to speak. So both the Z6 and the Z7 are full frame camera bodies, which means I lose that in-camera crop, and it means my 600mm lens behaves like a 600mm lens, my 200 to 500 behaves like a 200 to 500mm lens, instead of 750 at the long end, or my 600mm lens behaving like a 900mm lens. So I lose some pulling power by having a full frame camera body for wildlife photography. Now, is that a problem? Well, not really, because I can still crop post-production, and obviously I can wait for the animals to get closer. But I am losing some reach when it comes to my longer focal lengths. So I got to thinking, well, actually, am I better off buying the Z6 or the Z7? Because the Z6 is a 24 million megapixel camera sensor. The Z7 is something like 46, 47 million pixels. So there's more pixels, which means on the Z7 I can potentially crop tighter because I've got more pixels to play with. But is it as simple as that? And the answer is no, not really, because with the Z6 it's got 24 million pixels, so those pixels are bigger and not packed quite so close together, which means the high ISO performance is going to be better than the high ISO performance on the Z7. So it's a dilemma, isn't it, really? I can either pick the Z6 and have a better high ISO performance, which is important when it comes to wildlife photography, because often you're shooting early morning, late afternoon, evening when the light's quite low. So high ISO performance is really important, because we still need a fast shutter speed for wildlife photography. Or I can go for the Z7 and have less good high ISO performance. It's still going to be good, but obviously it won't be as good as the sensor that's got less pixels. But because the Z7 has got more pixels, then I've got more potential to crop, because I've got a higher resolution image. And also the Z7 doesn't have the optical pass filter. So in other words, it's not got the filter that's there to stop moire, which you get on many digital images. So in fact, the Z7 should give a slightly sharper image because it hasn't got that optical pass filter built in, whereas the Z6 has. So it's a real, photographer dilemma for photographers, really. And it doesn't matter whether you're shooting Nikon, Canon, Sony, we're all going to have this dilemma. Do we go for the higher resolution sensor to give us more cropping ability, or do we go for the lower res sensor so we've got better high ISO performance? And I've not decided really yet. I think I'm probably still going to go for the Z6 and go for the higher ISO performance. But it'd be really interesting to hear what you guys think as well. And if you can put your thoughts in the comments below, that would be great. But the reason I say I think I'm still going for the Z6 rather than the Z7 is because I want that high ISO performance. The autofocus should be the same or thereabouts on both cameras. Video performance or video specifications are going to be roughly the same on both cameras. So it really is about noise. And when I first started, when I first switched to digital photography many years ago, my first digital SLR was a 6 million pixel camera. And at the time, I was shooting lots of weddings, lots of portraits, and I would regularly print group shots of people up to 20 by 16 inches on a 6 million pixel camera. So the fact of the matter is, I think 24 million pixels for wildlife photography should still be okay. It should be more than enough. So I think what I'll do is probably go for the lower res body, but it's not a done deal yet. I'm still thinking about it. So that's my thoughts on high resolution sensor versus a lower resolution sensor when it comes to wildlife images. Now, if I was shooting landscapes, it would be a no-brainer. I would go for the Z7 Mark II because that's got the higher resolution sensor, and I'd be shooting at low ISO numbers because generally the landscapes are not moving and the camera would be on a tripod. So I'd be shooting at low ISO numbers, ISO 64, ISO 100. Whereas with wildlife photography, it's all about being able to shoot with a fast enough shutter speed to freeze the motion of that animal and also make sure we don't get camera shake because we're using long lenses. And the other thing to consider as well is with the smaller sensor, so the smaller resolution, sensor, so the Z6 24 million pixel sensor, I can shoot at 14 frames per second for action, and it will shoot up to something like 124 raw files before the buffer fills up. That's before the camera needs to have a rest. Whereas the Z7, it will shoot something like 77 raw files before the buffer fills up at 10 frames a second. So these are all things to consider. With the Z6 Mark II, I have less resolution. It's a 24 million pixel sensor, but I've got 14 frames a second, and I can shoot 124 raw frames before the buffer needs a rest or the camera needs a rest, and it writes those images from the internal memory to the memory card. With the Z7, I've got greater detail, so a bigger cropping ability, but I haven't got such a fast frame rate, and the buffer fills up more quickly. It is a decision, and it's a compromise, isn't it? And I'm working on that compromise at the moment. Which one do I choose? I mean, at the end of all of this, it may be that actually I decide to stick with the D500, because the D500 is 10 frames a second. You can shoot an enormous amount of raw files. I think something like 200 raw files. It's got good noise, high ISO noise performance, even though it's an APS-C sensor, and I've got that crop censored magnification, so the in-camera crop, so to speak, which turns my 600mm lens into 900mm lens, and my 200 to 500, the 500 end of my zoom lens into a 750mm zoom. So I don't know. I'm still weighing up the pros and cons, but I think I also want that ability to be able to shoot a better video and be able to track moving animals while shooting video. So I think, as it stands, a good compromise, if we're talking about wildlife photography, is probably the Z6 Mark II. So yeah, let me know what you think. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have enjoyed it, if you can consider subscribing to my channel, that would be great if you haven't already. If you can give it a like, that would be great. That always helps my channel. And if you do subscribe, if you can press the little bell icon so you'll know when my next video is up. And the next video will be again more of a location based one rather than me just sitting here talking about camera kit. But you know, the kit you buy is important. It's important to buy the right camera body, the right lenses for what you want to do. So if it's landscape photography, you're going to go one way. If it's wildlife photography, you might go another way. If you do both like I do, then there's probably no one camera that fits both of those options, and you're going to compromise. Although for me, at the moment I have a D500 for wildlife and a D800 for landscapes. So I've got the full frame camera, the D800 for my landscapes. I've got the APS-C censored D500 for my wildlife or action photography. So I've got two camera bodies that do two different things really, and I would love one that would do everything, but I don't think that that's a real world option, to be honest. So yeah, we'll see how we go over the next few weeks, and I think I'm probably will purchase a mirrorless body, and it looks like Nikon are up to speed now on the autofocus, so it's probably going to be the Z6 Mark II. But let me know what you think. So bye for now guys, and I'll speak to you on my next video.